Hey guys, welcome back to Pompoween. If you're new here, then welcome. My name is Pompberry, and Pompoween is my favorite season of the year. Today's video goes out to all my murderinos out there because I will be turning myself into Elvis, the cross-eyed Siamese cat. The cat we all know and love, and the cat who loves cookies. I've been wanting to do a My Favorite Murder related look for so long, and I could never come up with something, and I thought, why don't I just turn myself into Elvis? And I've had this idea for a long time, but I decided to save it for Halloween. Because why not? That's why I've got the black background today, because it's going to be an illusion type makeup, so I'll be like blacking out chunks of my head so that in the end it just looks like you're looking at Elvis. So I think that's it. I'm going to jump straight into it, but before I begin, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Your support means the world to me, especially during Pompoween. Last year when I did Pompoween, my skin got absolutely destroyed from doing all the makeup looks, and I think the main culprit was face paint. I could be totally wrong, but I think the main culprit was the constant use of face paint. So I'm gonna try to use a barrier lotion to see if that helps save my skin a little bit, and I'm gonna be going in with Skin Saver. Now, I usually use this on people on set if I'm gonna be applying prosthetics on them. I actually don't know how it behaves under face paint, so I'm just going to be trying it out for the first time today. And this just goes on like a lotion. Whoa, that is a lot. I'm gonna put some on my neck and chest as well. But basically, barrier lotions, they're really good for people with sensitive skin. It literally just creates a barrier that protects the skin from any like harsh chemicals or adhesives that are in some makeup products, and it also makes removal easier at the end of the day. So if you've been gluing a lot of prosthetics on someone and you want the removal to be easier, then I highly recommend using a barrier lotion. Now last year I used DermaShield, which is like a foam, but it smells like absolute ass. So I've switched to using Skin Saver. I find it much better in that sense. It doesn't really smell like anything, and it just feels like a lotion. But let's see today how it reacts under face paint. So luckily I was able to find a front-facing picture of Elvis online, and this is the picture I'm going to be referencing. The way I decided to do this is I superimposed this image on a front-facing image of myself so that I could plan out exactly where his features would be on my face. I'm not just totally winging it. In Photoshop, I put one on top of the other so that I could follow his exact proportions, because he has some really specific proportions. You can identify him amongst other cats. He has a very unique face. So I wanted to make sure that I was as accurate as possible with his proportions. And I'm going to start out by sketching the general outline using my wolf paints, using the Skins palette, and I'm going to use the lightest color because it's similar to my skin tone. So if I make any mistakes, it's easy to erase. So I'm just going to drop a few drops of water in there and swish it around. I'm going to be using a thin liner brush, and I'm going to start doing the rough sketch of his little face. Starting with the chin because it lines up pretty much exactly with mine. If you ever want to turn yourself into an animal, I highly suggest playing around with the proportions in a program like Photoshop, because then you can see exactly where everything's going to sit. Now, I'm not attempting to turn my features into his features, so I'm not having the nose here, the eyes here. I'm really just trying to recreate a picture of his face on my face. So his nose and mouth are all the way on my chin, and my features are going to be completely hidden in the end result. That's the hope. So he's got quite high cheekbones, and his eyes are going to be kind of like right under my nose. I want his eyes to be really the focus, because he's got such unique eyes. They're big and blue and beautiful. And he's cross-eyed, which makes him kind of instantly recognizable. And if you guys know the makeup artist Maria Malone, I absolutely love her. She's a sweetheart. She is so freaking talented. She did something similar a while back, doing a cat face on her own face, and she kind of showed the pictorial where it was similar, like the cat eyes were like right on her cheeks, and I definitely drew inspiration from her for this, but Elvis's proportions are different than the cat that she drew, so I'm having to change things up a bit. And she just did the cat face. I'm also going to be doing my neck because his face pretty much lines up exactly with my neck, so I'm just going to do like a continued body. And this is going to be a tricky part. That tickles! The Ears are gonna go over my eyes. My eyes and eyebrows are going to be hidden in the ears. This little face just kind of lines up with my neck. And I just realized I didn't even explain what my favorite murder was. I just kind of assumed all y'all are murderinos. So if you have no idea what I'm talking about during this entire video, I highly recommend you check out My Favorite Murder. They are my favorite podcast. It is a comedy true crime podcast. I know that might sound a little strange, but I'm really into true crime, but it can get really heavy, obviously, because it's, you know, it approaches really heavy subjects, but they do it like basically two friends just talking about these cases. So it is a lot funnier and a lot more casual than most true crime like documentaries and podcasts. They're not about like the cold hard facts. They're more about just like telling each other these stories. I really enjoy that because it's a much more casual listen. It's my jam. It's the first podcast I ever started listening to, and it got me like sucked into the world of podcasts. And now I listen to quite a few, but they're still my main one. Once that's done, I'm going to take the darkest color in the Skins palette and start really perfecting these lines. And this is just a really dark brown. I'm not going to use black just yet. That's going to be kind of like my last color probably. And even though his features are black, because the background's going to be black, I think I'm going to make them a little bit lighter just so that it doesn't like blend into the background. So I'm going to really kind of just finalize certain features and also start shading this darker area with this dark brown color. I want to know if you guys have any other podcast recommendations for someone who likes My Favorite Murder. I recently got recommended The First Degree and I started listening to it and I really, really like it. So that's been another one of my regulars. I really like the Bananas podcast from the Exactly Right Network, which is the network run by Karen and Georgia from My Favorite Murder. It has nothing to do with true crime though. It's just really, really funny. And it's just about kind of like absurd news stories and headlines. So I'm basically just filling in this entire area with the dark brown because I'm going to add texture to it by layering lighter colors on it after I've kind of mapped out the whole area. And I'll also darken some parts using the black. But for now, I'm just kind of adding blocks of color. And I should probably use a bigger brush than this, but I do quite like that this gives me the ability to draw these like little flicks, which emulates the fur. So I've pretty much mapped out the face. I've left out the lips in case I want to go get a snack or something. I'm going to leave them for last. And I'm going to do the same for the ears and just really define their shape. You can already see Elvis starting to take form, which is really weird. And at first I was like, oh, that's not really a costume. So it's just kind of like not really a Halloween video. But then I thought, how cool would it be if you just painted yourself as a cat and wore like a black cloak so that it looked like it was a little cat in a cloak? Like, I don't know. I feel like that could be an awesome costume if you were just a cat. Call me crazy, but if I saw someone at a party that just had a cat face, I'd think it was pretty dope. Granted, we're not going to have any parties because it's 2020 and we're in quarantine. But you know, on a Zoom call, if you just had a cat on a Zoom call, that would be awesome. And the advantage of doing a Siamese cat is that their colors in their fur, it's skin tone colors. So I can just use this brown in a more translucent matter and I just get a lighter brown. And if you have a darker skin color, then maybe you won't even have to paint in the really dark areas. You'll just have to paint in the lighter areas and do it that way. I'm definitely going to be using my skin tone for, you know, the lighter fur. I'm going to let the skin poke through. It won't be necessarily all painted if I don't have to because, you know, my skin kind of matches the color of the fur. And so you can work with that to your advantage. Literally use your skin as your canvas. I can totally see him now. This is so weird having a cat on my face. Now I'm going to go for the midtones, and because he's got really kind of cool tones on him. I'm going to use the next shade up in the Skins palette, but I'm going to mix it with some gray to try to cool it down a bit. And I don't know if this is going to be too light, but I figured I'd go light because I'm mixing in the gray, which is a little bit darker. So let's see if that works. I think it might be still a little too light, so I'm going to mix the next color up as well. This is the shade at the moment. It's reading a little too gray as well. So this one should add a little more saturation to it. And I might add a hint of the Mehron Paradise paint in Mango. This kind of golden yellow, just to give it a more yellowish undertone. I don't want it to read yellow per se. Right now, this is the color that I'm mixing. Don't want it to be gray. I still want it to have a hint of like beige. I just want it to be like a cool tone beige, pretty much. So let's see, I'm going to add that right here. Ooh, that is a pretty good match. I'm going to have to mix a lot more of this. Also because it's quite sheer right now. I kind of hate mixing face paints because it just takes a long time. You have to really work the water into the paint to get a good amount of pigment out of it. But I'm just gonna go ahead, and I'm doing everything with this little tiny brush because I want to be able to do the little fur-like strokes. So always doing like singular strokes so that I get that fur texture. And I'm gonna apply that in the areas around the dark part of his little face. And if you didn't know, which you probably didn't, why would you? I used to have 2 cats. They've both passed away, but I actually have a cat allergy, which is super unfortunate because I love cats. I am 100% a cat person. I love dogs, don't get me wrong. I just prefer cats. And we might be getting a cat soon. That's something that's in the works right now. Despite my allergy, it's something that might happen. I actually developed my allergy 2 years into having my first cat, and it was really unfortunate, but it didn't stop me from getting a second cat. And it's not like a super severe allergy, like I won't go into shock and die. I just sneeze a lot, my arms get itchy, my eyes get puffy, you know, it's just uncomfortable. But I love animals too much. I have the same allergic reaction to dogs, and I think horses as well. And it just sucks. I wish I wasn't allergic to any animals. And as I do this, I'm having to mix several batches of this mid-tone paint, which isn't terrible because then I get kind of a variation in the color of the fur. Like every time I'm mixing it just a touch different, and that way you get more texture because there will be a difference in the color. And now I'm really going to start paying attention to the direction of the fur as well. So I know I was painting this area this way, but his fur actually grows out. And so I'm going to try to be mindful of that and paint it outwards. I actually love painting in fur. I don't know why, I just love it. I've painted fur a few times. I've done a few different like animal looks, and I don't know, it's something I find quite enjoyable and almost soothing, if I'm honest. And I'm also kind of encroaching on the dark area, but that's fine. I'm going to kind of go back and forth with the colors until I define, you know, all the shapes the way I want them. I'm also adding lighter details to the ears as well. The ears are still kind of very rough. I'm going to perfect them a little bit later, but I just figured I would start this. And I also want to add this color to the sides of my neck. Now I'm going to go for the lightest color again, and I'm going to start doing a few little highlights here and there to just keep adding to that fur texture. I do want it to be a little more liquidy than that so that I can get a finer stroke. I'm gonna leave like the whiskers and stuff for last, but this will just help me define certain areas a little bit more. Like he starts getting a lot lighter here on his neck and chest area. So I'm going with the lighter color around the perimeter of the bottom of the face. And these highlights might seem really drastic now, but these colors dry a little bit darker than they go on. All face paints are like that. They always dry a little bit darker. And as I said, there's going to be a back and forth with the colors. So there's going to be a lot of layering to get the fur texture right. And also my eyelids are messed up. I'm not really worrying about the eyelids right now. I totally opened them while the paint was still wet, but I'm going to worry about that later. For now, I'm just trying to get the differences in the tones of his fur, because he has like a medium tone and then a slightly darker one, slightly lighter than the darkest. There's a lot of variations in his fur, so I'm just trying to get that down right. I'm also going in and highlighting the darker areas of his face, because there are some highlights in here as well, which help to define his like bone structure. He's got some great cheekbones. Like around his eyes, it's a little bit lighter. It's not this light, but what happens with face paint is that once you get it wet, it reactivates whatever's underneath it. So I'm applying it really light, but then I'm continuing to paint that area, and that mixes it with the paint that's underneath. And it just mixes into a slightly lighter brown. I know I kind of left a lot of areas blank, so I'm going back in with the darkest color and using a bigger brush this time and just filling that all in, like inside my nose, which I always hate, and then in between the eyes, on his little nose, in this area right here that I was kind of demarcating where his cheekbones flow to, but I think I've got a pretty good idea. And I'm filling in his little nose, which is gonna get a little lost, but I'll redefine it after. Now I'm going to start really defining his nose. I'm going to highlight the very tip of the bridge of the nose, I guess. And this actually helps me to kind of flatten out my features, because the lip goes outwards and then right under it, it goes inwards. But if I'm highlighting under my lip, that makes it kind of go outwards. And so it helps to flatten this whole area. Then I'm also going to define the shape of the nose, because it's a little wonky right now. I've zoomed you in a little bit, and I think I'm going to start going in with some black to do some shading around his face. And I'm using wolf paint still. This is just a big pot of the black that I have. And again, using my little teeny tiny brush. And I'm going to start shading the areas like around the nose to really define his bridge, because he has a very, very strong and defined bone structure. And that goes up all the way to the eyes. The eyes are almost kind of lined up top. This is where I can really hide my nostrils and my nose, because he's just got this really kind of dark area right here where my nostrils are. So it's pretty perfect. And there you go. Just kind of disappears. I'm obviously going to have to powder my nose because you can see a reflection, and that gets in the way of the illusion, but that's going to be like a last detail. I'm also going to start perfecting the ears a little bit more, going in with the black to really define the outline. But I will be leaving like a light outline around them so that you can differentiate them from the black background. I'm not going to go too dark with them for that reason too, but I do want to add like a little bit of black in here, but I'm going to leave them for the most part just like dark brown. And I'm also going to define the nose area and a little mouth. I'm going to take the dark brown color and start doing little flicks around the perimeter to just create a little bit of a fur texture so that it's not just a simple outline. And his mouth is kind of tricky because he's got a very kind of long nose. I'm having a little bit of trouble getting it exactly right. Pun intended. But speaking of exactly right, another podcast that I do like to listen from the network is The Murder Squad with Billy Jensen and Paul Holes. That one is more of like a traditional true crime hard facts podcast because the whole point is that they're trying to solve cold cases, basically like crowdsourcing new clues and information. And it is a really, really good podcast. I just can only listen to it like small doses at a time because it can be quite heavy. I've been listening a lot more to The First Degree, which is Billy Jensen's other podcast that I talked about before. So he has those two podcasts, which are both true crime related. One is a lot more casual. The other is him doing his actual like investigative journalism work. So it's a lot more like dense with information. And Sometimes I'm in the mood for that, but usually when I have a podcast on, it's while I'm driving or doing chores around the house. I even listen to podcasts while I'm doing yoga as well, which is a little strange, doing yoga, listening to true crime, but hey, that's just how I roll. Then I had previously lightened this whole area, but I'm gonna start darkening it up again. I've got the darkest color but diluted on my brush, and I'm just really mixing those two together to get a lighter tone than this, but a darker tone than this, if that makes sense. It's got almost like a V shape to it. I'm also going to do a little bit of a darker fur that he has here on the sides. But it's just kind of tedious work, just trying to match the picture to what's on my face. I like it. This kind of makeup really helps to train your eye. This is actually how I learned how to draw when I was a kid. I would just like take an object, put it in front of me and try to replicate it, or take other drawings from like my books or anything and just try to replicate it. And with that, I started developing an eye for like proportion, and that's how I learned how to draw, is by eyeballing. And honestly, I feel like that's the best training that you could do. The best exercise is trying to replicate things that are in front of you. That will really help to train your eye in regards to proportions and placement, etc. Also, handy little tip, if you went a little too strong with a color, you can just take water on your brush and reactivate the color and spread it out a little bit, blend it out. These areas are a little too dark for my taste, so I'm just dipping my brush into water and reworking that area to soften that shading. Going back to the black, I'm going to define that line that we had going on previously, which is basically the connection of his cheekbone to his mouth. Goes all the way down here. And this is the type of look that I could also spend like 10 hours doing, because I could keep tinkering and keep tinkering. I'm gonna try to keep the tinkering to a minimum today. I don't want to spend all night here. It's already been like an hour and a half or so, maybe a little less. And I did stop for snacks, so less. But I don't think I've ever tried to do anyone's pet on my face before, so this is interesting. I feel almost like I'm doing like a celebrity transformation, but this time it's a cat, which is weird. I feel like his face is so recognizable that if I don't get the proportions right, it's just gonna look like any other cat, and we can't have that now, can we? Just gonna keep shading here and there. And I think I might do the eyes next, even though I'm not done with everything, but I might just do the eyes just cause it's like the only thing that's missing from the face. And once I get that down, then I can really start just perfecting and finalizing everything. And I obviously still have to finish doing the mouth area and the eyelid area. Those are the two areas that I'm gonna leave for absolute last. And the eyes are a little wonky. I realized this one got a little smaller while I was like tracing it with black. So I'm going to try to match them up when I fill them in. Okay, I think I'm going to start filling in the eyes now, and I'm just going to start with the white, just filling in the little whites of his eyes that you don't usually see in cats, but because he's cross-eyed, you see a little bit. And now is where I'm going to even out the size of the eyes. This eye is a little bit bigger than this eye, so I'm going to kind of overlap and fill outside of where I traced it so that the eyes can match a little bit more. Oh, and I forgot to mention before that the gray I'm using is from the Wolf Essentials palette, and now I'm gonna mix a little bit of the blue with the gray. His eye is a very gray tone of blue, so I'm just going to mix those two, and I'm just mixing on the lid of the palette. I'm gonna start with this lighter shade and then I'll add some shadows to it. So I'm just gonna fill this in. Oh, that is the perfect color. And now that that's filled in, it's easier to go in and correct the shape with the black. I feel like I want to tweak it a little bit and reduce it here on the sides. He's got really like almond shaped eyes, and I don't know, I feel like it could use a little tweaking. I'm having a bit of a hard time getting the shape just right. I'm gonna do some shading and highlighting on the eye. I'm going to take a very diluted black so that I can go and create shading on the blue of his eyes And because it's a gray blue, I'm just going in with pure black, but very diluted so that it mixes in and just turns into like a darker blue, especially here on the innermost part. Don't want it to go too dark. So I might have to mix some blue in here, but this will help for me to see the shape of the eyes a little bit better too, because I feel like his eyes have so much dimension to them that until I do this, I won't be able to really see if I've gotten the shape right. And I'm also going to do his pupils. And his pupils, they don't seem like regular cat pupils that are like, you know, elongated. They seem a lot rounder, and I don't know. I don't know if the eye itself is different because it's cross-eyed, but I'm gonna kind of just follow what I see here. And you kind of don't really see a defined pupil, which is interesting. Okay, so I've gone on the Elvis and Mimi and Dot Instagram, and it does seem like he has rounder pupils. So I'm going to fill that in. He's got bigger pupils too. They're bigger and they're rounder, and they just kind of are on the innermost part here. So I'm just shading all of that. Now I'm taking some pure gray to do a few highlights on his eyes. His eyes are really gray in this photo, but I was looking at the other pictures on his Instagram and they're like really, really bright blue. So I think I'm just gonna add a hint of pure blue to this just to bump up the saturation a little bit, adding the blue to wherever I shaded with the black. And I quite like having this kind of lighter line here separating the eye, or rather the pupil, from the fur. This one's a little bit thick, but I like having that there just so it doesn't get lost. Just going to thin this one out a little bit. But sometimes you have to cheat like little lines like this. If you have two areas that are black up against each other, creating a little highlight can help to really define those different areas. Now last but not least, I'm grabbing a little bit of white to do, whoa, that is way too strong. I want it to be a diluted white so that I can do some further highlighting in the blue area. I'm still going to highlight with like pure white, but I just want to add a few little more intense highlights here and there that aren't exactly pure white. I'm going to also add a little white section here in the inner corner. I think that's what was missing in the eye, and it helps to define that shape a little bit better. I've also decided to use some gray to do some highlights on the face. I don't want it to get too desaturated, so I might mix in some of the lighter skin tones. And right now I'm just doing like some last little tweaks just so I can get everything exactly how I want it, as close to the image as possible. But this is like the basis of it. Like if I wasn't going for a very specific cat, I would have already been done at this point and then just filled all this with black. I'm also taking the second darkest brown and I'm going to use that to fill in parts of the ears. I want there to be a bigger contrast between the ears and the background. Even though his ears are very dark, I just want to make them a little bit lighter so that there's some contrast between the ears and the background. And this also just adds like more texture to them, which is always good. Okay, so I've been making a few tweaks here and there, and my husband just stepped in and took a look at it, and he's like, I think you have to make this area a little bit darker, and I agree with him. Sometimes when you're staring at something for too long, it's either good to get a second opinion or to take a little break and then come back to it. And I think to make this part a little bit darker, I'm gonna go with this shade of like medium brown. I'm gonna dilute it and just kind of go over this area just to knock it back a little bit. And that's already looking a little better because the top of his head is darker than the bottom. It starts getting like lighter and lighter as we go down. So I'm just knocking this back a little, and the top here as well. Much better. And then I can darken here a little bit too. I also want to add the little white highlights to his eyes. Don't want to forget those. And you want to make sure your brush is really clean for this. You don't want the white to mix with anything else, otherwise it will muddy it. And I also want to do some little white whiskers. Make sure they're very thin, so you want the consistency of the paint to be pretty liquid. And he's got little eyebrow whiskers too. I want these to be very discreet. For the eyes, because eyelids are oily and you can see it's starting to like crease up and everything, I'm going to use some eyeshadow in that area. And I'm going to take the Black Moon Cosmetics Orb of Light palette. It's got these great cool tone browns and black, really intense black. And I'm going to start with the lighter brown, and I'm going to apply that kind of following the pattern that I've got going on. Can even use that in other areas of the eye so that the color, not the eye, the ear, just so that the color is kind of like consistent throughout. Using this as like my highlight points in the ear. And then I'm going to take the darker brown and apply that in the areas that I want to darken up a little bit. Now that's done, I'm going to take the black and I'm going to do this area right here to kind of define the outline of the ear. And I also want to hide my lash line, so I'm going to use black to kind of create random patterns around my lashes so that you don't see just like the straight line here. I kind of want to create a zigzaggy pattern with a black so that the eyelashes kind of get lost in the mix. That's the best way to hide them. You never want to see like straight lines in a design like this. And I'm also going to take liner and line my waterline so that I can hide that even better. I'm actually also going to use that black on the tip of my nose to try to mattify it. I might go in with a little bit of the brown just under my nose. I'm going to use the light brown here and the black on the Cupid's bow to try to mattify it and somewhat flatten it out. I'm going to use that lighter brown, this area under my lip, and the black along the edge. Might actually use this lightest color, just to highlight right there and right under my lip so that it seems more flat, like that. Now you can't really see my bottom lip. I'm using the eyeshadow in different areas where I just want to kind of give a little more depth, doing like the last bit of shading using the eyeshadow instead of the face paints. You can totally layer the products like this and it gets rid of any shininess that the face paint might have, because the face paint that I'm using, the Wolf one, it's wax based, so it does have a bit of a sheen if you layer it too thick. So this just helps to mattify everything a little bit. I have a cat on my face. That is so weird. Ooh, and one thing to hide my lips. I'm going to take the lightest brown and just put that right on my lip, avoiding my Cupid's bow. And that helps to flatten that out a bit as well. Okay, now I'm going to take the lightest color on a big flat paddle brush and I'm going to start painting my neck. And I actually want to get like this dry brush effect because it emulates the texture of fur. So if you see the streaks, that's even better because then you get the texture of fur. I'm going to keep doing that all the way down. Now my neck is going to be his neck. I'm going to wait for that to dry and then I'm going to really load up my brush with more paint and do a second layer, concentrating it in the center so that that's like the brightest area. But I might also take some white on that brush to kind of highlight the center. And I don't want to go full white because he's not white there. It's just a very, very pale beige. I'm also going to take the next color up to kind of shade the sides, or even a little bit of the medium brown to just add some texture there. That's a little too red toned, so I'm mixing a little bit of gray in there to knock it back down. Just same stuff I did with the face. Now I'm just using a really long liner brush to just highlight the very center, just doing little brush strokes just to highlight the fur and give this a little more texture. Now just the last touch, I promise, before I fill this in with black, and that is taking the lightest color on a long liner brush and I'm just going to outline all the dark areas, so around the ears, and I'm just gonna kind of outline everything. And this will help to create contrast between Elvis and the background. I don't want him to get lost in the background, so this is very important. It's not going to stay this thick. I'm going to thin it down when I paint the black, but I definitely want there to be a highlight around the outline. Now all I've got left to do is paint the black around here to create the illusion and put my hair back. I was going to use my wolf black face paint, but then I realized that I really don't want any shine. So instead of using a wax-based face paint, I'm going to use a glycerin-based face paint, and that is the Mehron Paradise Paint. This is the Mehron and Mimi Choi palette, and there's a black paint right here in the middle. Kind of scares me having water-activated paints right in between cream makeup and eyeshadows. But anyway, I'm gonna try to not make a mess of this. Glycerin-based paints tend to have a more matte finish. So I'm just gonna go ahead and fill all this in with black. Being very careful with that outline. She says as she paints black right over it. Oh, I gotta get my ears too. Damn it, I forgot. I don't want it to look like he has shoulders, like he's a man cat. So I'm going to paint black here as well to kind of create the little body. So I'm going to paint myself entirely black, basically, and then I will pull my hair back and come back to show you the finished look. And this is the finished look. This is so weird, having two pairs of eyes. I kind of think that after all this, I deserve a cookie. Oh, that is so weird seeing his face move. I mean, honestly, I'm kind of tempted to wear this as a costume one day for Halloween and just have like a black cloak and just be like a little cat. I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's awesome. If you do want to do this on your face and you want it to last a bit longer, I would recommend using a setting spray, doing lots of layers of setting spray, avoiding sweating because if you sweat, it can run. But yeah, I'm kind of really happy that I did this. I've had this idea for a really long time, and I was saving it and saving it and saving it until it was the right time, and I feel like Pumpaween is always the right time. So I know this was a little bit unconventional for my Halloween series, or rather Pumpaween, but I really hope you guys enjoyed this. I had a ton of fun doing this. If you want to see me do other animals or other pets, please let me know down below. Maybe not for Pumpaween, but you know, for later. I wish I could do Frank and George, but they are fiercely private, so I don't even know what they look like. But anyway, I really hope you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much to all my patrons who support me. Stay sexy and don't get murdered. And I'll see you next time. Bye.